We go to the next talk. Marjolein, are you there?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, perfect. Everyone is on time. That's great.
Yeah,
so,
good.
Marjolein, so Marjolein Lanzing, I got is our next speaker. She's going to talk about the ethical aspect. I hope that we get also an insight there, because this is something that we did not, in all these technological things, we did not discuss. I got to know her work through Serge Baudonnet. He proposed me to read the paper, and I read what she published, and I really liked it. So I decided to invite her, and she's now at the University of Amsterdam, fresh baked assistant professor there, I assume.
Yes.
And we are looking forward to your talk. Marjolein.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I wish I had been able to join sooner, because I saw the lineup and the titles of the talks, and I'm incredibly interested in all of them actually. So I hope there will be some other opportunity for me to get in touch with you and maybe ask some questions.
Don't worry.
Okay, that would be really nice. I'll make sure that happens at some point. And I have some time constraints, so that's the reason. But so, thanks again for inviting me. Just to make sure, is everybody seeing the viewer view of the presentation, not the one with the notes?
We're seeing the presenter view, so you need to switch once.
Switch the screens again. Okay, yeah. Somehow this always gets mixed up.
Now it's fine.
All right, there we go. Okay, well, So my name is Marjolein. I'm a freshly baked assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam in the philosophy of technology. Before that, I was a postdoc at the Radboud University Nijmegen at iHub, which is the interdisciplinary hub for security, privacy, and data governance, where I researched the Googleization of health. And I'm still working on that a little bit. And it was one of the reasons why I started writing when we first encountered the whole phenomenon of contact tracing apps in the Netherlands, to write about some of the ethical concerns, because very early onwards, of course, in the pandemic in the Netherlands, there was talk of a contact tracing app, a Corona app, we call it in the Netherlands. And of course, this immediately raised some concerns. It was already in early April that the idea was posited by our Minister of Health, Hugo de Jonge, who instantly promised us that, or the citizens of the Netherlands, that privacy would be guaranteed. And then pressed on the matter, there were some questions by ethicists, I think, or at least by me, wondering what he actually meant when he was talking about privacy. And I was also wondering whether there was actually more at stake than just privacy. So I quickly started writing a sort of a research statement and a call for other researchers also to latch onto that and to write about ethical concerns about privacy issues, but also beyond privacy. So I wanted to make a sort of, I called it an ethical roadmap that includes basically 3 ethical concerns that include, but also go beyond privacy. And I think it's important to note before I start that all these concerns are also beyond the question of effectiveness. So I think effectiveness, when we talk about contact tracing apps, already comes up very quickly. And you could dismiss perhaps the whole Corona app or contact tracing app by saying it's not effective, and therefore maybe the cost-benefit analysis doesn't hold, and we shouldn't use it at all. But let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that it would work, or that it would be effective to some extent. What kinds of ethical concerns would be left? And this article was published then over the summer. Okay, so my talk today, I'm just going to give you a brief outline of the Corona Melder, which is the Dutch contact tracing app in the Netherlands. And I'm going to describe the 3 ethical concerns beyond effectiveness that I discuss in the paper. And I end the presentation by showing you why this matters, or why I think this is important. And I end with some recommendations and current research, because I went on studying these issues, of course. Okay, so in the Netherlands, the Corona Melder app, well, in short, it's Bluetooth based. It works on an exchanging of codes, and it relies on the Google Apple infrastructure. So that's in short the 3 keywords, I guess. But the longer story is that the Corona Melder app will warn users if they have spent 50 minutes or more in close contact with someone who tests positive for the virus, as long as they have allowed that information to be used. It's a non-compulsory app, just like I think all contact tracing apps in Europe, which works by exchanging random codes with other phones via Bluetooth technology. So it relies on the Google Apple infrastructure, as I said, uses a Bluetooth signal, which means that a log is created that indicates who the user has been in contact with. Infections are monitored on the central server of a health authority, and yeah, it's a decentralized system that stores one's personal data on one's phone. And I think there's also a more technical explanation, but I guess you can all tell the story better than I can. But if you have questions about that, I can answer those too. Okay, so that's the app we're dealing with at the moment. In April, of course, it was still a bit unsure what it would look like. The design was still unclear. So that was also the reason for proposing an ethical roadmap, because it was still not really clear how the app would be designed and what eventually the ethical implications would be. So I guess some of my concerns were partially addressed, and some we're working on. Okay, so the 3 ethical concerns I discussed in the paper are the idea of privacy as anonymity, which is very much pervasive in Dutch discourses and policy discourses and design discourses. The second one was big tech dependency. So this also came up in the months after the contact tracing app and after Google and Apple had announced that they would provide this infrastructure, technological infrastructure. And then there is the issue of coercion, which I'll discuss also. So about the first issue. So, well, privacy is mostly, at least in the Netherlands, very narrowly conceptualized as anonymity most of the time. So, and that's interesting, I find. So in the paper, I discussed this, what the problems are when you conflate privacy and anonymity. So first of all, it's important to realize that privacy is not synonymous with anonymity. Privacy actually entails that you can choose to what extent other people have access to your information and who you share something with. But there's a level of control there. We often refer to the most common privacy definitions as control access definitions. But I think it's really important to understand that we may want to share certain information with certain parties. So we might want to share information with our local health organizations, and that's not a problem at all. It just depends on the context and the relationships we find ourselves in, what we deem to be appropriate or what we think is okay. So the question is whether the app involves future parties. I think that's important, that users can trust with their information. And anonymity simply entails that parties that you do not want to access your data can still access your data, but simply will not know who the data will belong to. So there's no measure of control there. Your data is just anonymized. It's still offered up, but you have no say in where it goes. Now, in the paper, I argue that this raises several problems, amongst which the problem that it may seem as if privacy is something purely individual, some sort of luxury rights, and that we should sacrifice it in order to serve the collective good or the common good. But I argue that that it has many social dimensions, that it's an important condition for a free society, a society in which one cannot be arbitrarily manipulated by the government or one's employer or by a health organization or health insurer or big tech. And that without privacy, citizens all are to a certain extent vulnerable to unwanted interference. I think that's important. And the problem with privacy as anonymity is as follows. So privacy as anonymity or that type of conceptualization is insufficient to safeguard these types of social dimensions. So anonymity is a very relative concept. I don't think I need to explain that. From anonymous data, I think this is common understanding. One can deduce information about groups and individuals. Information, of course, is not really personal. It often tells and reveals something about others. So by contributing data, even if it's anonymous, you can still tell something about other people. And And I think in addition to that, I think it's important to realize that privacy does not only have an informational dimension, but also a decisional dimension. So one can interfere with individuals' behavior and choices based on group data. And I think that doesn't really matter whether that's anonymized or not. And it has been already suggested that, also based on group data, people may receive notifications that tell people to stay inside or to get tested based on the anonymized geolocation and biometric data of people in one's neighborhood. And that was prior to, I think these concerns were raised very early on before the design of the app was final. So I think some of these issues have been solved, but I think it's still important to realize that privacy is much more than that. Okay, so that was the first concern. So I think it's important to rethink the concept of privacy when we're thinking about design and technology. The second concern I had had to do with big tech dependency. So as soon as Google and Apple launched their technological infrastructure on which governments could build or plug in their own contact tracing apps, I think there were several philosophers who raised the question about dependency. So what we see, and I think this is an argument which is predominantly made by Professor Tamar Sharon, who works at the Radboud University. She argues that we increasingly witness a Googleization of health, not only of health, of all kinds of public and social domains. So that basically means that big corporations or monopolists structure certain social domains that were previously structured by the public or by certain types of social relationships that had nothing to do with corporate interests or only halfway. And she argues, so Sharon argues that she's worried about the Googleization of health crisis management. So relying again on big tech to solve an important social issue or to help us structure how we deal with this pandemic creates a type of dependency that we may not want. And again, a certain power asymmetry that we may not want. I think, so she raises the point that companies like Google, they have been investing in the health sector and collecting health data for years. And by encouraging users, again, to use the technology made by Google, for instance, or supported by Google to contain the virus, that means that basically society welcomes again a monopolist in a crucial part of the public health crisis management. And of course, this claim has also been recently made by Naomi Klein and Evgeny Morozov. And this, I think that this is crucial about the argument. This allows these corporations to shape these domains. So not on the basis of democratic values or democratic procedures, but on the basis of their own and potentially commercial interests. And I think you may not have to agree, I think, with the latter, but I think I do think that this could be something that we could agree on, which is that when citizens become dependent on these companies, they lose their grip on what they want these social domains to look like. So it plays a role, I think, an important role. Okay, and then finally, the last ethical concern I raised, and I think this has been well captured already, but at the time when the idea of the contact tracing app was launched in the Netherlands, there was still a tiny debate, or not, tiny, I think it got smothered really quickly, but there was a debate about whether such an app should become obligatory or not, or whether it should stay voluntary. So it was sort of nipped in the bud, but there was a window for an indirect type of coercion. So I think everybody agreed quickly on the idea that direct coercion to ensure the effectiveness of an app would conflict with autonomy and autonomous citizens and with the tenets of our liberal democratic constitutional state. But of course, there was this sort of window open for societal coercion, where, for instance, in order to access a supermarket or go to your work, you would need to have downloaded the app and be green, be clean. And this, of course, I think is something, that has been prevented by the EU. So the EU has proposed guidelines for contact tracing apps, and they've urged everyone to make contact tracing apps voluntary by default. And that these types of social constructions aren't allowed. But it did raise, at the time, it raised questions about the fairness of social participation and whether exclusion or social exclusion by not choosing to use an app would be fair. Yeah, and there's much more to be said about that, I guess. We can go into that later if you're interested. But I think the argument gets even more stronger if you consider the fact that it may involve government or corporate surveillance. So if you indirectly or directly force people to use an app when there's good reasons not to use it, that would have been problematic, I think. But that was at the time, so I think that has been sort of covered, at least in the Netherlands. So why do these concerns matter? There's, of course, several reasons for that, and there's lots of interesting philosophical literature about that too. But personally, I'm really interested in the notion of autonomy and in the social dimensions of autonomy, meaning that privacy and how we disclose information is also, is an important value to protect autonomy and should be seen as a social value as well. In that sense, also because it creates, I think, because these types of concerns raise the issue of how we can combat power imbalances, and that's a special interest of mine. But mostly, I think, with regards to especially the latter two concerns, we want to safeguard democratic procedures and to safeguard public deliberation. And I think that with some of the trends that we're seeing, and it's not only related to the contact tracing app, we see that some of these decision-making processes are circumvented by relying, for instance, on big tech or corporations. I think that's important. So by the end of the paper, I make several recommendations, or I made those in April or May, which were about reconceptualizing privacy, so not seeing it only as anonymity, but as a social value, which could have led to maybe other ideas about where to put our money. Maybe not so much in building a contact tracing app, but maybe more in manual contact tracing. Depends. I made a suggestion for independent non-commercial developers of an app, or at least a critical stance towards big tech, to safeguard those democratic procedures and public values. And I made a call for voluntariness, but I think that's now EU guaranteed. Although I have to say that at the moment in the Netherlands, we also have some other digital surveillance fish to fry, including the collection of mobility data in the Netherlands, which of course, may re-raise some of these concerns. Just to give you a heads up on what I'm doing right now, with regard to the first part about the reconceptualization of privacy, I'm making an effort to do that myself. So together with a legal scholar, I'm currently doing a policy and discourse analysis. Discourse analysis about the use of privacy as an anonymization and as an individual right rather than a social value. And we're trying to pose a normative ethical critique of those types of privacy framing, offering also a social alternative that focuses on social vulnerabilities. I think vulnerability is very important. So that means all kinds of ethical concerns, including and beyond privacy. And there are many more, of course. And if you have any questions or if you'd like to know more or contribute, very welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you hear me now. It was frozen for a second. So we have for our next, is there any question on the chat or anybody raise hands?
Not now.
The philosophical aspect
chat is
always popular.
Chat is active, but no.
Okay.
Not
there is a question from Claude.
Okay, Claude, a very fast one, because the next speaker, I'm very sorry, the next speaker has a time restriction. Please, fast. Fast question. Claude, go on. Claude?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
Yeah, I was wondering whether the paper that she's referring to, it's available online. Where can we get
it's open access. I can put a link in the chat if you like. And,
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect.
and if you have any questions, just shoot me an email.
Yes, thanks.
The paper is ethically accessible. Okay, so thanks a lot, Marjolein. I know also that you have time restrictions, so we will definitely come back to you because, as I said, many colleagues are writing papers together or a paper together, and we may also need your input. Okay, the next talk, thanks a lot.